True, we love life, not because we are used to living, but because we are used to loving. There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is arguably the most sophisticated philosophical work in the history of philosophy. Yet, compared to other sophisticated works, it is still a joy to read because of Nietzsche's style of writing. Nietzsche called Thus Spoke Zarathustra a symphony, a holy book, the fifth gospel, and humanity's greatest gift. Let's start with the title. Who was Zarathustra? Zarathustra, also known as Zoroaster, was an ancient Persian prophet and a founder of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest continuously practiced religions. He is believed to have lived sometime between 1500 and 1000 BC, although precise dates are uncertain. His teachings are thought to be the first to divide the world in forces of good and evil. Zoroastrianism is often considered one of the earliest forms of monotheism. Nietzsche's use of Zarathustra to spread his message is thus an ironic wink. A new set of values will be preached in this book the same way this happened a few thousand years ago. The subtitle of the book is A Book for Everyone and No One, which just shows the great marketing and writing skills Nietzsche had. It is an intriguing way of luring you in, while at the same time signaling that this work might be misunderstood. Nietzsche often reflects on the message conveyed by his philosophy and the possibility that people might not be prepared to listen to it. The book was published in 1884 after struggling with his health over the past years. Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra's first publishing counted only 100 copies after a dispute with his publisher. When changing publisher, Nietzsche decided to add several new prefaces and parts to his old books in order to republish them. Thus Spoke Zarathustra was first published in 3 parts. Later, another part was added. The structure of the book could be compared to the structure of an opera, 3 parts of drama and 1 part comedy. It is already far too hard to understand the first 3 parts, let alone the later added 4th, so in our explanation we will focus on the first 3 parts of this book. An interesting philological fact is that in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche changed his writing style completely. It is baffling for scholars that this book has come from the same hand as his others, as there is barely any continuity in style between them. This, in my opinion, just shows the genius that Nietzsche is. Right before his famous breakdown, Nietzsche writes to his good friend Koselleck, "For the past 4 weeks I have finally understood my own writings. Not only that, I admire them. In all seriousness, I never knew what they really meant. I would be lying if I claimed, other than the Zarathustra, that they had impressed me." Nietzsche himself thus implies that his most important and meaningful book is the one we are about to delve into. Nietzsche's Zarathustra is written in an esoteric Bible-like style, which gives the book a feeling of familiarity for people who have read the Bible. Most texts are written as a sort of sermon and end with the phrasing, "Thus spoke Zarathustra." One of the great urban myths surrounding this book is that it was one of the most read books during the First World War. The most read book during the war being, of course, the Bible. Within the work of Nietzsche, Thus Spoke Zarathustra is unique because it is not critical by nature, like most of Nietzsche's book, but rather positive and ideal shaping. It is the book that announces the coming of the Übermensch. Without any further ado, let's jump into the first part of the book. Thus Spoke Zarathustra tells us the story of the prophet Zarathustra, who at the age of 30 climbed up a mountain and stayed there for 10 years. The age of 30 is of course a symbolic age, as prophets like Jesus and Muhammad and similar figures such as Buddha started spreading their message at this age. We see a different movement already. Zarathustra remains within his loneliest loneliness in the mountains. After 10 years, Zarathustra starts a sort of conversation with the sun. Historically, the sun has represented the highest principle or God within philosophy. For Plato, the good is the highest principle that shines through the realm of ideas and makes them knowledgeable for us. Augustine will refer to God who illuminates our minds like rays of sun. Zarathustra alludes to the fact that every sun must set, referring to the fact that the idea of God has lost its meaning. The German word for setting is Untergang, which can also be translated to descending in English. Zarathustra wants to leave his mountain and descend back to humanity to spread his message. But what is this message? Several ideas will be presented throughout this book, and without proper knowledge of these ideas, the metaphors and allegories will be impossible to understand. Let us thus not follow a linear path through the book, but first properly introduce Nietzsche's most important concepts: the death of God, the will to power, and then the Übermensch. The death of God. For most readers, the mentioning of the death of God is revolutionary. Of course, it is quite an astonishing fact that belief in Europe is diminishing. Christianity has been the guiding light for the past 2 millennia. But it is not that Nietzsche is famous for recognizing Christianity's demise. In the history of philosophy, one finds tons of mentions of the declining belief in God, long before big old mustache philosopher mentions it. Philosophers such as David Hume, Baruch Spinoza, and even Kant mention or allude to the fact that God plays a less central role. The death of God for Nietzsche is a warning for what follows. How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions. Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? There are vast consequences to the fact that God is dead and the looming threat of nihilism. Do you want to learn more about the death of God? Check out our video on the death of God, where we delve deeper into this concept and its most common misunderstanding. The death of God is directly linked to another concept of Nietzsche, the will to power. The will to power is Nietzsche's core principle. It is a metaphysical one, meaning that it is at the base of all reality. But what is the will to power? The will to power is the idea that everything in life strives for power. There are two main aspects to this principle: an aspect of power and an aspect of creativity. Let's first focus on the aspect of power. Nietzsche comprehends our reality as one of conflict and chaos. Two substances meet, they clash, and one overcomes the other. This happens on all levels of life. He recognizes this in space, where stars and planets collide, but also in nature, where an animal hunts another, where the lion plays with its prey. One doesn't have to think far to recognize this play of power in human interaction. It becomes a little more complex when Nietzsche recognizes it on a societal scale. Our set of values, he argues, are ways in which a group of people reign over another. In the ancient Greek world, the values of strength and fame were very prevalent, and thus the group of men who were stronger were in power. Inherent to this play of power is that we suffer, yet the suffering, Nietzsche claims, is inherent to power and what makes us stronger. However, according to Nietzsche, something went awry when Christianity reigned over societal life. Christianity has flipped the table. Those who are weak and meek will inherit the earth. If you are sick, weak, without friends, without joy, suffering, don't worry. In heaven, things will become better. Yet for Nietzsche, Christian doctrine is a denial of what life really is: will to power. And while Christianity does have power, in its doctrine it preaches of non-violence. Nietzsche calls this decadence and life denial. Instead of abolishing suffering, we should embrace it, use it to make ourselves stronger. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. In short, the principle of the will to power is an idea of what constitutes reality. Everything strives towards power to overcome, to gain strength over another. Suffering is inherent to this process of overcoming and should thus be embraced. Yet, in Christian doctrine, this principle is denied. But power is not the only aspect of the will to power. There is also a creative aspect to it. In the introduction of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the sun starts setting, signaling the time of a new dawn and a new set of values. Inherent to the will to power is that new sets of values are created in an endless process. Zarathustra refers to the will to power as a striving that is tirelessly generating. There is thus a cyclical nature to reality. Values are created, they conflict with the ruling set, one prevails and reigns until the next set of values is created to conflict with. The will to power thus has an aspect of power where it wants to overcome, and a principle of creativity where it generates a new set of values. The death of God is the setting of one set of values making place for a new one. How then should we comprehend the Übermensch in light of the will to power? The Übermensch. To answer this question, as the new meaning of life, the new set of values that Nietzsche is trying to provide to humanity. As Nietzsche writes in the Zarathustra, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. I entreat you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak of you of superterrestrial hopes. Behold, I teach you the Übermensch, he is this lightning, he is this madness. Behold, I am the prophet of this lightning, and a heavy drop from the cloud, but this lightning is called Übermensch. To many people, the Übermensch is the blonde-haired beast. Yet I would like to argue that the Übermensch should be understood as a sort of horizon, something to work towards for humanity, yet never attained, because that would imply the end of the process of overcoming. Nietzsche wants us to live according to nature, and nature that is will to power. As Zarathustra preaches, man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Übermensch, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and downgoing. Man should overcome himself and strive towards more, the same way that a climber tackles a mountain. He suffers when climbing, but greatness awaits at the top of the mountain. Against the image of the Übermensch, Nietzsche introduces the idea of the last man, someone who is unable to self-overcome and create, who lives in denial of the will to power, the enigmatic figure who thinks that they have already found all the answers to life and is not open or curious about anything. This is the very reason why the Übermensch, in my opinion, should be understood as a horizon to strive towards. If one loses his strive, one becomes the last man. Let's recap. In order to understand Thus Spoke Zarathustra, you have to comprehend three core concepts of Nietzsche. The death of God, which speaks to the fact that the belief system upheld by Christianity loses its authority. Their values are no longer supported, the looming threat of nihilism is near. The will to power, which has a power aspect and a creative aspect to it. The power aspect alludes to the fact that everything in life strives toward power, and the creative aspects allude to the fact that new values are created to collide with and strive towards power. Nietzsche upholds that with the death of God, this process of creation and collision has come to a halt. That is why he criticizes Christianity. Yet Christianity is losing its position, so there is a need for a new set of values. That is where the idea of the Übermensch comes in, a step beyond humanity, a goal to strive towards, or in other words, an horizon that propels us towards greatness. The idea of the Übermensch is strongly intertwined with the overcoming of suffering. One gains strength out of their suffering. Yet that is where the book takes a turn. Zarathustra talks with the grandest of joy on the new meaning of life, the Übermensch, yet at the same time feels something is wrong. Something is missing. In the second and the third part of the book, Zarathustra's joy and spirit dwindles as he is faced with fundamental issues. It is 1884 when Nietzsche writes of the Übermensch, one of his most known ideas. Yet, interestingly enough, it is only really mentioned in the first two parts of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Nietzsche wrote a lot of works after Thus Spoke Zarathustra, like Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, Twilight of the Idols, and The Antichrist. Yet in none of these works does he mention the Übermensch. So let us examine why the Übermensch takes up a less vital role in the work of Nietzsche by taking aim at two other core concepts introduced in the later parts of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the eternal recurrence of the same and Amor Fati, or one's love of fate. The problem. In the second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the ideal of the Übermensch is confronted with an issue. How does one handle the suffering that is not fully overcome, that has become trauma, resent? Nietzsche claims that resent is that which fuels nihilism. Resent is a form of life denial. If we cannot overcome our suffering, it haunts us, makes us bitter, takes from us our joy of life. Within Thus Spoke Zarathustra, resent is described as the disgust for our unwanted past. Revenge is the will's aversion of time and it was. To Nietzsche, the hardest thing is to affirm to an unwanted past. Take for example a mother who has lost her only child. Can she ever not experience resent? An iron will is needed for that. In the Grave Song, Zarathustra preaches on the graves of his youth and how he wants to bring to these graves an evergreen rod of life, which alludes to the affirmation of traumas from his youth. Yet Nietzsche writes on the problems of this affirmation. All days shall be holy unto me, so spoke once the wisdom of my youth, truly the language of a joyous wisdom. But then did my enemies steal my nights and sold them to sleepless torture. Ah, where has the joyous wisdom now fled? How does the Übermensch tackle this trauma? By transforming trauma into greatness? Is that always possible? Redeeming the past and recreating every it was into this is how I wanted it, that would be salvation for me. The redemption spoken of is one that presupposes that we can will back in time, but is precisely that is not possible. Nietzsche himself has to admit to this. The will cannot will backwards, that he cannot break time, and the desire of time, that is the loneliest misery of the will. The Übermensch is confronted with the problem of suffering that has turned to resent. This introduces the question of the eternal recurrence. The eternal recurrence. As Zarathustra says, the things that were are the most terrible for our joy of life. People experience resent over traumas they have experienced in the past. These fuel resent, and resent to Nietzsche ultimately fuels life denial. This introduces the problem for the Übermensch, an unrelentless striving forward that is being held back by traumas and resent for the past. One cannot will backwards, one cannot change the past, as is so beautifully described by Nietzsche. The pride of youth is still upon you. Late have you become young. But he who would become a child must overcome even his youth. In Ecce Homo, Nietzsche shares that the very thought of the eternal recurrence is at the basis of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He writes in Ecce Homo on the eternal recurrence, "It belongs in August 1881. It was penned on a sheet with a notation underneath, 6,000 feet beyond man and time. As I was walking near the lake of Silvapana through the woods that day, I stopped at a mighty pyramidal rock not far from Surley. The importance of the idea is obvious through the annotation of 6,000 feet beyond man and time. It is there that we have to find the answer to the question of resent for our past. The eternal recurrence is a thought experiment that claims time is not linear but cyclical. Imagine that everything that has ever happened is happening and will happen in the future will repeat itself in exactly the same way over and over again for eternity. This means that every event, every action, every moment of joy or suffering, every decision you've made or will make will occur an infinite number of times. Nietzsche mentions the idea in several books. A clear meaning of the thought experiment of the eternal recurrence is found in the gay science in the parable titled The Heaviest Weight. What if, some day or night, a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you all in the same succession and sequence, even the spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with its speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal?" In the Zarathustra he adds, "Behold this gateway, dwarf," I continued. "It has two faces, two paths meet here. No one has yet followed either to its end. This long lane stretches back for an eternity, and this long lane out there, that is another reality. And if everything has already been there, what do you think of this moment, dwarf? Shouldn't this gate also have been here before?" The eternal recurrence is Nietzsche's way of putting the problem of resent towards an ill-willed past in the spotlight. Nietzsche even tried finding a scientific explanation for the idea of the eternal recurrence. In a future video, we will delve deeper into this idea. The cruelty that comes with a reality such as the one Nietzsche paints with his will to power is daunting. Life is cruel, suffering is inherent to it, we all strive for power, and now, to end it all, you have to go through it for eternity? How does one grapple with this? Amor Fati. Nietzsche's answer to the question of the eternal recurrence is that of love of fate, by answering yes to the eternal recurrence and to give place to one's trauma by accepting them as chunks of granite which you cannot change. A part of you is fated to be what it is, not changed, not reshaped or made better. The passive acceptance of one's fate. In order to fully comprehend the idea of Nietzsche, we will look at the text, the second dancing in song in which Zarathustra and life converse. Zarathustra preaches a sort of love poem for life, but life answers in disbelief. Then did life look thoughtfully behind and around and said softly, "Oh, Zarathustra, you are not faithful enough to me. You love me not nearly so much as you say. I know you think of soon leaving me." Life is convinced that Zarathustra had not been capable of accepting the abysmal thought of his own unwilled past. But Zarathustra knows the secret of life, that it is will to power and recurs identically into eternity. "Yes," answered I hesitatingly, "but you know it also." And I said something into her ear in amongst her confused yellow foolish tresses. "You know that, O Zarathustra, that knows no one." And we gazed at each other and looked at the green meadow over which the cool evening was just passing. And we wept together. Then, however, was life dearer to me than all my wisdom had ever been. In other works, such as The Gay Science, Nietzsche speaks of the idea of Amor Fati. In the fourth part of this book, Nietzsche writes mockingly that for the new year, he too is allowed to make a wish. This wish goes as follows. "For the new year, I still live, I still think. I still have to live, for I still have to think. Sum ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum." Today, everybody permits himself the expression of his wish and his dearest thought. Hence, I too shall say what it is that I wish for myself today, and what was the dearest first thought to run across my heart this year. What thought shall be for me the reason, warranty, and sweetness of my life henceforth. I want to learn to see more and more as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all, on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Amor Fati is thus the idea of accepting one's fate and accepting trauma and resent for the past. The idea of the Übermensch thus fades away in the second and third part of the book. There seems to be a tension in the work. The Übermensch seems focused on activity, value shaping, striving, and transforming one's suffering into greatness. Amor Fati seems focused on a passive accepting of one's past. How do we have to interpret the dichotomy between these two ideals? I would personally argue that in later works, Nietzsche's answer to this question is a reference to a sort of balance. One should try to still strive towards the transformation of suffering into greatness or value shaping, but at the same time accept where this is not possible. That is a fine line, a tightrope walking exercise, if you will. In future videos, we will address some of the later ideas that Nietzsche introduced. For now, I leave you with the same paradox Nietzsche was left with when writing this beautiful work of art that is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. With a good understanding of the relationship between 5 important concepts that Nietzsche introduces, the death of God, the will to power, the Übermensch, the eternal recurrence of the same, and Amor Fati, the understanding of the different metaphors and aphorisms should be a joyful walk through Nietzsche's thought. Have I covered everything that can be found in the book? No. But you should be able to use the framework of concepts that I have introduced to dissect for yourself the meaning of the aphorisms. If you are interested in delving deeper into the work of Nietzsche, here are some of the books I would advise you to read. Lawrence Haytap's Nietzsche's Life Sentence, Coming to Terms with Eternal Recurrence, and Lawrence Lambert's Nietzsche's Teaching, Interpretation of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I will leave these titles in the biography beneath this video. For believe me, the secret for harvesting from existence the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Send your ships into uncharted seas. Live at war with your peers and yourselves. The gay science, it sounds fabulous, and honestly, it is. Right up until it drags you into a philosophical abyss. The gay science is above all a testament to healing after sickness. A healing that Nietzsche himself went through and a healing that our sick culture must go through. Nietzsche himself describes the gay science as one of his most personal works. The title and the subtitle of the book have 3 distinct meanings. First, it refers to the troubadours, poets from southern France active in the 12th and 13th centuries. The term Gaia Scienza signified the artful, musical and lyrical approach of the troubadours to knowledge and life. Gaia Scienza was light in tone but profound in substance, exactly the kind of spirit Nietzsche was drawn to. Nietzsche draws on this tradition to shape his own philosophy of joyous wisdom, irony and vitality, setting it in contrast to the heaviness of modern philosophy. The Gay Science contains more poems and songs than any other of his books, also reflecting this reference to the troubadours. Secondly, the word gay can also convey a sense of lightheartedness and vitality. Nietzsche himself describes what gay science means in the preface of his book, Gay Science, that signifies the Saturnalia of a spirit who has patiently resisted a terrible, long pressure patiently, severely, coldly, without submitting, but also without hope, and who is now all at once attacked by hope, the hope for health, and the intoxication of convalescence. This book was written during a period of convalescence, a recovery from illness that Nietzsche endured for much of his life. But Nietzsche also deliberately adopts a tone of gay science to counter the weighty, somber tone of traditional philosophy. Thinkers like Kant and Hegel, with their dense moral frameworks, represent exactly the kind of seriousness Nietzsche wants to break away from. Instead, he champions a lightness of spirit, a philosophy that plays, risks and laughs against what he would call systems of resent. The third meaning carries a deeper nuance. The title can also suggest a kind of grimace, a bitter smile in response to the heavy burden we must bear, as Nietzsche describes. His philosophy comes with a stark warning. Our culture is afflicted, and this sickness leads to a profound crisis. If we fail to confront it with lightness and courage, we risk falling into resentment. Hence the bitter smile as we face the weight of existence. The first English translation was titled The Joyful Wisdom, but this misses a crucial nuance. The word gay carries connotations of a sort of light-hearted defiance. It is a nod to the ideal of the free spirit, a central theme in Nietzsche's work during that period. The German word Wissenschaft translates strictly as science, not wisdom. However, science in this context doesn't refer to modern empirical science or to established knowledge. Instead, it points to the ongoing pursuit of knowledge that is inherent to all science. The first 4 books of the Gay Science were written between 1881 and 1882, with Nietzsche working across Genoa, Nice and Sils Maria. It was published in 1882. The book is written after Human All Too Human and before Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The book reflects Nietzsche's continued break with Romanticism, Christianity and metaphysical philosophy. The Gay Science marks a transitional work in Nietzsche's philosophy, bridging his earlier thinking with the more radical ideas that would define his later works. The Gay Science serves as a prelude to Nietzsche's greatest work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Fittingly, it ends with the very first paragraph of Zarathustra, foreshadowing this philosophical shift that follows. The style of the book blends songs and brief fragments with more extended passages, all presented in Nietzsche's characteristic aphoristic form. After breaking with his former publisher in 1886, Nietzsche sought to renew interest in his earlier works under a new publishing house. To that end, he revised and expanded several of them. In 1887, he released a second edition of the Gay Science, adding a 5th book with a new preface and an appendix of poems titled Songs of Prince Vogelfrei. For now, we will focus on the original 4 books in this video, as these are the original book. From these 4 books, the last one is undoubtedly the most important to understanding Nietzsche's philosophical ideas. For structural purposes, I will at times summarize key takeaways out of individual texts to create an overview of the argument one might derive from Nietzsche's work. This will help us to recognize these same points in other texts. While many Nietzsche scholars might disagree with this method, it is the easiest way to present something that resembles a theory. Without any further ado, let's get into the book. The Gay Science starts with a text titled The Teachers of the Object of Existence. It handles those individuals who attempt to divine or reveal the purpose of human life. The first paragraph of this text goes as follows. Whether I look with a good or an evil eye upon men, I find them always at one problem, each and all of them, to do that which conduces to conservation of the human species, and certainly not out of any sentiment or love for this human species, but simply because nothing in them is older, stronger, more inexorable, and more unconquerable than that instinct, because it is precisely the essence of our race and herd. Nietzsche speaks here of an instinct, the inherent drive to seek and need meaning in life. As human beings, we crave purpose, direction, and something to anchor our existence. While this search appears deeply human, Nietzsche suggests that it wasn't always so. In earlier times, this need for meaning may not have existed, yet we cannot return to this era. We are left with the reality that we are, by nature, searching creatures, constantly seeking meaning in our lives, or as Nietzsche puts it in the text. But with all this corrective laughter, human nature has on the whole been changed by the ever-new appearance of those teachers of the design of existence. Human nature has now an additional requirement, the very requirement of the ever-new appearance of such teachers and doctrines of design. So the key takeaway in the beginning of this book is the following: human beings have a fundamental need for meaning in life. This search for purpose is not just a preference but an instinct, an essential part of what it means to be human. This text is followed by another titled The Intellectual Conscience, which criticizes people who blindly follow these teachings and doctrines on the meaning of life without clearly thinking about them. Here, the ideal of the free spirit, which dominated Nietzsche's thought in his time, is first shown. Nietzsche uses it to describe a person who has liberated himself from conventional beliefs, particularly religious, moral, and cultural dogmas, and dares to think independently. For Nietzsche, the prevailing moral framework of our time stands in opposition to life itself, as it promotes the denial of desire, instinct, and vitality in favor of restraint, self-denial, and otherworldly values. A free spirit is one who has freed himself from these restrictions. A second key takeaway for Nietzsche is the realization that our traditional moral frameworks, such as Christianity, are fleeting. Through our critical mindsets, the belief has dwindled. Meaninglessness or nihilism is becoming predominant. In Book 3, Nietzsche's first text, New Struggles, addresses this point by describing his famous idea of the death of God for the very first time. After Buddha was dead, they still showed his shadow in a cave for centuries. A colossal, horrible shadow. God is dead, but given the way people are, there may still be caves for millennia in which his shadow is displayed, and we must still defeat his shadow as well. This text has multiple layers. First, it shows that even though we are losing our belief in an omnipotent God, that does not mean that the whole framework collapses all at once. The full collapse still needs time, but is inevitable, an idea further explored in the upcoming fragment. Second, the cave is a reference to Plato's allegory of the cave, where he illustrates how people can be trapped in ignorance, mistaking shadows on the wall for reality until they are freed and come to understand the true nature of existence. Ironically, he uses it to show that the ideas of Plato himself are one of those shadows on the wall that we are losing. Third, Buddhism was, in the 19th century, widespread around Europe through the many expeditions that were being done. Interesting here might be that the teachings of Buddhism have a cyclical nature. Once they have been forgotten, a new Buddha is born to spread his message once more. To summarize, two key takeaways. Humans have developed an instinct or nature that dictates them to find a meaning for life. Our traditional moral frameworks, such as Christianity, are fleeting. Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God is among his most famous ideas, yet it is often misunderstood. A newcomer to his work might assume it simply reflects his atheism. In truth, it does the opposite. It is addressed to non-believers, showing them that, despite their disbelief, they too remain entangled in the spiritual sickness of the age. Here, we can bring together the previous two key takeaways with a third one. Humans need a meaning in life. Our traditional meaning is fleeting, and the third key takeaway, there is no inherent or objective meaning to life. These 3 points together form what Nietzsche calls the sickness of our time. That we need meaning, that our current meaning is fleeting, and that life is inherently meaningless. This is the nihilistic tendency that we are confronted with within his text, The Madman. The text The Madman starts with a group of disbelievers gathered at a marketplace. A madman enters the market in broad daylight. He has a lit lantern and starts frantically asking them whether they know where God is. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun?" We are once more confronted with the erosion of our moral foundations, yet it is a madman who is proclaiming this message. Why would Nietzsche use a madman to convey one of his most important messages? The irony, although a madman speaks, he speaks the truth. Yet in the eyes of the people on the market, who represent Nietzsche's contemporaries, there is no reason to worry. The madman confronts them with the affliction of nihilism, yet no one listens. Here, the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground and it broke into pieces and went out. "I have come too early," he said then. "My time is not yet." If life is inherently meaningless and people have not yet realized the implications, then Nietzsche must reflect on how we can confront the death of God. Nietzsche's answer? To become gods ourselves. That is the conclusion of Nietzsche's three key insights. If we meet meaning, cannot derive it from our traditional framework, and life is inherently meaningless, then we must create meaning on our own. For Nietzsche, this would be a godlike achievement, unlike anything witnessed in a very long time. First, we must accept the inherent meaninglessness of the world, its coldness and senseless suffering. Only through this acceptance can we begin to create new values, and thus we arrive at the fourth book of the gay science. These three key takeaways serve as its starting point. The book opens with the chapter Sanctus Januarius, a title that operates on several symbolic levels. On the one hand, the reference points to the Christian martyr Saint Januarius, patron of Naples, whose miraculous blood is said to liquefy at certain moments of the year. This saint thus embodies the themes of renewal, transformation, and the mysterious conversion of life and death. By invoking him, Nietzsche hints at a kind of sanctification of the cyclical, an affirmation of recurrence that does not rely on dogma but resonates with the rhythm of becoming. At the same time, Januarius evokes Janus, the Roman god of thresholds, transitions, and beginnings. Janus looks both forward and backward, embodying the paradoxical coexistence of past and future. In this sense, Nietzsche's gesture is profoundly Janus-like. It gazes into what has been and simultaneously into what is yet to come, fusing memory with anticipation. The Sanctus of Januarius then becomes less the sanctity of a churchly figure and more the sanctity of the threshold itself, the holiness of saying yes to time in all directions. Thus, the figure of Sanctus Januarius in the gay science carries a dual resonance: the Christian saint whose blood is a sign of renewal, and the pagan god of openings whose two faces reflect the eternal return of beginnings. Nietzsche brings these layers together in his fourth book. In a letter to Peter Guest, a good friend and confidant of him, he writes on this fourth book: "Above all, is Sanctus Januarius at all comprehensible? After everything I have experienced since I am among men, my doubt about that is tremendous." Nietzsche underscores the significance of this fourth book as it marks the first occasion on which he articulates many of his most pivotal ideas. The opening text of the fourth book, entitled For the New Year, takes the form of a New Year's wish, in which Nietzsche articulates his hopes for the coming year. Such wishes are, of course, a traditional custom, but here they also reveal the originality and creative style with which Nietzsche writes. So what does Nietzsche wish for in this new year? To love fate, to love the ugliness of life, its pointless suffering and meaninglessness, or as he writes, "For the new year, I still live, I still think. I still have to live, for I still have to think. Sum ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum. Today, everybody permits himself the expression of his wish and his dearest thought. Hence I too shall say what it is that I wish for myself today, and what was the first thought to run across my heart this year. What thought shall be for me the reason, warranty and sweetness of my life henceforth. I want to learn to see more and more as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. The acceptance of the inherent meaninglessness of life is captured in Nietzsche's phrase Amor Fati, which translates to love of fate. What is the ugliness in life? That our life and suffering is without inherent meaning, yet we can still see it as necessary through our own strength of mind. That is what Nietzsche would deem a godlike act. Where Schopenhauer would choose pessimism towards his truth, Nietzsche differs. Amor Fati refers directly to the text of the death of God and the title of the book. To accept the heaviness and ugliness of the death of God, one must confront it with a light-hearted spirit. Resent for life will only weigh us down. If you want to see a more in-depth video on this New Year's wish, check out the full video we did on this text last year. To fully accept the inherent meaninglessness of life, Nietzsche conceives of a thought experiment. Nietzsche fittingly names this thought experiment the heaviest weight. For to him, it is no easy task to bear. He first conceives of it in Sils Maria during a solitary walk by the lake of Silvaplana. This heaviest weight is none other than the thought experiment of the eternal return. The heaviest burden. What if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live it once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh must return to you all in the same succession and sequence, even this spider and this moonlight between the trees and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned over again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, 'You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine'? If this thought were to gain possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question is, each and everything, do you want this once more and innumerable times more? Would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight? Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate, eternal confirmation and seal? Nietzsche has the radical idea that one must live as though every moment were to be repeated endlessly in exactly the same succession for all eternity. While it is also presented as a physical theory, I would like to emphasize that Nietzsche uses it for its psychological weight. This is Nietzsche's answer to the sickness of our times. If one is able to accept the inherent meaningless to life and suffering, one is capable of overcoming oneself. It is at this exact point that Nietzsche's book Thus Spoke Zarathustra starts. Zarathustra is both the preacher of the teachings of, as well as on a journey of overcoming himself. And thus comes the last section, entitled Incipit Tragedia, translated to Tragedy Begins. In this fragment, Zarathustra, an old prophet of Zoroastrianism, gives up his serenity of his 10 years of solitude and decides to go down among men. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of Urmi and went into the mountains. There he enjoyed his spirit and his solitude, and for 10 years did not weary of it. But at last his heart changed, and rising one morning with the rosy dawn, he went before the sun and spoke thus to it. "You great star, what would be your happiness if you had not those for whom you shine?" The end of the gay science is also the beginning of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche's most revered book. If you want to learn more about this book, then you should check out our full video on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The closing words of this section are deliberately ambiguous. They go as follows. Thus began Zarathustra's downgoing. In German, however, untergehen can mean both to go down but also to drown or to perish. For my own reasons, I choose to interpret these words as thus began Zarathustra's destruction. Why should you read Nietzsche's The Gay Science? The Gay Science marks the beginning of a new period of powerful thought, containing many of Nietzsche's most important ideas. He writes in short, intense flashes, numerous throughout the book, which he himself compares to cold baths. For I approach deep problems such as I do cold baths, fast in, fast out. That this is no way to get to the depths, to go deep enough, is the superstition of those who fear water, the enemies of cold water. They speak without experience. Thus you are invited in the cold water of the Gay Science. While Nietzsche introduces a lot of new concepts, what one might miss when reading the Gay Science's first 4 books is the concept of the Übermensch, which is actually only presented in this book Zarathustra, and the concept of the will to power, which seems to dominate Nietzsche's later works. What should be our key takeaways from this book? First of all, human beings have developed a fundamental need for meaning in life. Our moral frameworks, like Christianity, are fleeting. Life is inherently meaningless, it is harsh, and suffering is prevalent. Nietzsche concludes that our culture is sick. Nihilism presents itself. Nietzsche's conclusion is that we must live in acceptance of this reality and shape our values accordingly. In his thought experiment of the eternal return, this acceptance is taken to its radical extreme. For Nietzsche, to embrace one's bleak fate is a godlike feat, attainable by only extraordinary human beings. This marks the starting point of Das book Zarathustra, where he introduces the idea of the Übermensch. Personally, this is one of my favorite works by Nietzsche. It contains some of his wittiest and most beautiful passages. For instance, the aphorism "star friendship," which completely overwhelmed me the first time I read it. And thus, the memory of our former friendship should become more sacred. There is probably a tremendous but invisible stellar orbit in which our very different ways and goals may be included as small parts of this path. Let us rise up to this thought. But our life is too short and our power of vision too small for us to be more than friends in the sense of the sublime possibility. Let us then believe in our star friendship, even if we should be compelled to be Earth enemies.
It's that time of year again. Christmas has come and gone and our attention shifts to the year ahead. With the new year come the tradition of crafting resolutions. But as you jot down your own, have you ever wondered if any philosophers created their own New Year's resolutions? What would a philosopher wish for in the new year? And is making resolutions not a superficial act which philosophers should condemn? Is it not arbitrary to choose a random date of the year to look back and try to become a better person? A philosopher, someone who strives for wisdom, should surely rise above this. Nietzsche has always been a philosopher who defied convention, and his approach to New Year's resolutions is no exception. In this video essay, we'll explore the concept of New Year's resolutions in a greater depth. So if you are interested in Nietzsche's New Year's resolution and want to learn more on how his resolutions show his unique position in the history of philosophy, stick around, and who knows, perhaps this year Nietzsche might just change your resolutions for the better. For the new year. I still live, I still think. I must still live, for I must still think. Sum ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum. Today, everyone takes the liberty of expressing his wish and his favorite thought. Well, I also mean to tell what I have wished for myself today and what thought first crossed my mind this year. A thought which ought to be the basis, the pledge, and the sweetening of all my future life. I want more and more to perceive the necessary characters in things as the beautiful. I shall thus be one of those who beautify things. Amor Fati. Let that henceforth be my love. I do not want to wage war with the ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse the accusers. Looking aside, let that be my sole negation. And all in all, to sum up, I wish to be at any time hereafter only a yea-sayer. Nietzsche, as most people do at the end of the year, writes on his wishes for the new year. Central to his thought is the ability to see those things that are necessary as beautiful. In Nietzsche's worldview, suffering is an integral part of life, something which cannot be abolished. Life is a constant struggle with hardship and traumas of the past. One can be, quote-unquote, lucky in his dealings with sufferings, but all human life knows suffering. It is inevitable. Life is suffering. Suffering, to Nietzsche, can be seen as the ugliness of life. Some will conclude that a pessimistic outlook on life is inevitable, but this is not the message that Nietzsche takes away from his insights. Let us take a step back. Before we can get a full grasp of the meaning of Nietzsche's resolutions, it will be important to understand how suffering and desire is understood in most philosophies and religions. Suffering in other philosophies and religions. Let us start with suffering in Christianity. Christianity sees earthly suffering as a divine test of faith, a means to purify the soul, and a pathway to align with God's eternal plan of redemption. This view frames suffering as an essential part of the human condition, meant to prepare believers for the ultimate joy and justice of heaven. Far from being meaningless or arbitrary, suffering is imbued with purpose, as it serves to refine one's character and deepen one's reliance on God. Christ's crucifixion stands as the ultimate symbol of this belief, demonstrating that enduring suffering with faith leads to salvation and eternal glory. For Christians, present pain is often understood as a small price to pay for the infinite rewards of heaven, where all wounds will be healed and all tears wiped away. The fleeting desires and comforts of this world are thus subordinated to the promise of eternal fulfillment in God's presence. This perspective asks believers to accept suffering with humility and trust, emphasizing that its full meaning will only be revealed in the afterlife. In this way, Christianity redirects the human desire for meaning and resolution beyond earthly existence, offering solace in the hope of ultimate redemption and divine purpose. One can see this idea in Christian art as well. Take for example a painting of Rubens. Below, you can see people suffering, living in agony and drawing their gaze upwards. Above, we see heaven, a place free of suffering, a place filled with people living in peacefulness. This twofold view of life shows what is present in Christianity. Life is suffering, but the afterlife is not, so throw yourself in the Christian moral teachings to reach this heavenly afterlife. In ancient Greece, different ideas exist concerning suffering. Let us look at Epicureanism, for example. Epicureanism is a form of hedonism which holds that all people strive for is an abolishment of suffering, which they call ataraxia. When we experience pleasure, there are two factors at play. For example, when we eat, there is the pleasure of the taste, but also the abolishment of hunger. An Epicurist holds that once the desire is satisfied, no suffering will be present. We should strive for this state of non-suffering or ataraxia. To reach this state, the Epicurist distinguishes between three categories of desire: natural and necessary desire, natural and unnecessary desire, and unnatural and unnecessary desire. The natural and necessary desires are desires that are essential for survival and happiness, such as the desire for food, shelter, and companionship. Natural and unnecessary desires are desires that arise naturally but are not essential for happiness, such as the desire for luxury foods such as wine. Unnatural and unnecessary desires are desires that are unsatisfiable. They stem from social convention or vanity, such as the desire for excessive wealth, fame, addiction, or power, and often these desires feel like a thirst that can never be quenched. To live a fulfilled life, an Epicurist will argue that only the first and at times the second category of desire are to be satisfied. One should refrain from indulging in the unnatural and unnecessary desires, as these are unsatisfiable. When we strive towards this desire, all that we are left with is emptiness and suffering. Another great example of ancient views on suffering and desire is found in Stoic thought. If you want to learn more about it, check out our video we made on Epictetus a while back. In Eastern thought, desire and suffering take up a central role as well. For Buddhists, at the core of suffering lies desire, and at the core of desire lies the misinterpretation of our self. A Buddhist will argue that we are attached to life, yet life is transient, it is impermanence, and we should learn to accept this. In the life of Buddha, Siddhartha is confronted with suffering and sickness, aging and death to teach him the lesson of impermanence. The core teaching on suffering for Buddhists is the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. Truth number 1, dukkha, the truth of suffering. Life is inherently marked by suffering, dissatisfaction, and impermanence. This includes physical and emotional pain, the inevitability of aging, and the transient nature of pleasures. Truth number 2, samudaya, the truth of the origin of suffering. The root cause of suffering is desire and attachment, driven by ignorance. This craving leads to clinging to desires, possessions, and false beliefs, perpetuating the cycle of suffering. Number 3, nirodha, the truth of the cessation of suffering. It is possible to end suffering by extinguishing craving and attachment. This state of liberation and freedom from suffering is known as nirvana. Or, as Gautama Buddha said, there is an antidote to suffering, freeing yourself from desire, from attachment, and from the self. Truth number 4, the truth of the path of cessation of suffering. The Eightfold Path provides the practical guidelines to overcome suffering and achieve enlightenment. We strive for an abolishment of suffering in Buddhism by realizing that our desires are rooted in the attachment we have to the things that are impermanent. Anatta, or not-self, is a core Buddhist teaching that denies the existence of a permanent, unchanging self. People mistakenly believe in a fixed I or self, which leads to clinging to the ego, identity, and possessions. This belief in a permanent self leads to desire, as we seek to protect, satisfy, and enhance this imagined self. From this desire, suffering arises. To eliminate suffering, we must accept life's impermanence, which in turn dissolves the desire from which our suffering is born. In all three positions, Christianity, Epicureanism, and Buddhism, suffering is linked with desire. In Christianity, it is the wrongfully oriented desire. In Epicureanism, it is the unnecessary and unnatural desires in which we should refrain from indulging, and in Buddhism, it is desire as a whole that causes us to suffer. Both suffering and desire are seen as negative aspects of life in these strains of thought, a negative aspect that should be abolished. Suffering and resent for Nietzsche. Nietzsche breaks in the most radical sense with the views on suffering and desire present in ancient Greece, Christianity, and Buddhism. Nietzsche despises those who with diminished desire preach an ascetic lifestyle and therefore shun away from suffering. Rather, he would focus on the positive sides of suffering. Imagine a climber tackling a mountain. As he approaches the mountain, he feels demotivated by the steep hills he must walk and climb. As he starts his walk, he is confronted with the feeling of pain and strain in his legs. His breathing gets heavier and a feeling of discouragement arises. Yet through the strength, he pushes these feelings away and continues his climb. Many more moments arise, but when he tackles all of them, he reaches the top. And it is at the tops of mountains that the most beautiful views arise. Nietzsche uses the metaphor of the climber to show how life might be filled with hardship, yet in its core he is convinced that people can tackle it and make good of the cards they are dealt with. Nietzsche even goes a step further by arguing that life needs suffering, as through suffering we can reach greatness. For greatness, a change at the very core of our being is necessary. Christianity and other strains of thought have imprinted us with the idea that desire and suffering are negative experiences that should be abolished, or as Nietzsche puts it, you want, if possible, and there is no more insane, if possible, to abolish suffering, and it really seems that we would rather have it higher and worse than ever. Well-being, as you understand it, that is no goal, that seems to us an end, a state that soon makes man ridiculous and contemptible, that makes his destruction desirable. The discipline of suffering, of great suffering, do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements so far in man. If we are to transform our lives and aspire to greatness, we must transvaluate our values and adopt a perspective on suffering that differs from what history has traditionally taught us. We need to value suffering and desire as integral parts of the beauty of life. It is in Nietzsche's New Year's resolution that he advocates this stance towards suffering. So let us now focus on the text itself. Nietzsche's New Year's resolution is published in Nietzsche's The Gay Science. Associate link to this book is underneath the video. Published under the heading Sanctua Januarius, a reference to the two-faced god Janus, this Roman god had one face looking backwards and one looking forward. This is a subtle nod at the idea of what resolutions are, a reflection and looking back on what happened the past year to turn the head forward and make life better. For Nietzsche, things are never quite so simple. One of Nietzsche's core ideas is the eternal return, a thought experiment that forces us to look at our past and into the future and ponder, do we want to relive our lives identically into all eternity? Do we want to relive all suffering in our lives? And do we want to relive all happiness and all our cherished moments? And if we were to answer yes, what kind of stance towards life is needed to reach this? The thought experiment of the eternal return forces us to ponder on all sorts of suffering and how to deal with them. How do we, in the spirit of Nietzsche, transform our suffering into greatness so that its eternal return is always welcomed? We should strengthen ourselves from the suffering, make ourselves great. Yet, suffering is twofold. Can all suffering be transformed into greatness? Is there suffering in life that is so great that it cannot be transformed? Aren't there scars from our past that haunt us still? Can we still grow from these past traumas? These are all valid questions that should be presented to someone who upholds Nietzsche's ideas of suffering and transformation. Nietzsche, being the sharp thinker that he is, thought about these valid considerations as well. It is at this point that we arrive at the meaning of Nietzsche's resolutions. Suffering that cannot be transformed to greatness should be accepted as a part of life, not by transforming it into greatness, but by accepting it as an integral part of our life. One should force himself to see the beauty in these necessary parts of life, or, as Nietzsche writes it, I shall thus be one of those who beautify things. Amor Fati, that henceforth be my love. Amor Fati, or the love of one's fate, is Nietzsche's great resolution for the new year. This wisdom is only strengthened in his thought experiment of the eternal return. Imagine a universe where time runs in a circle so that your life, as you have lived it and will live it, will return identically for all eternity. Nietzsche lays a heavy emphasis on the moment you realize what the thought experiment means. All your suffering and hardship will return identically. All past traumas and scars are to be relived. One is forced to beautify those things or perish under the heavy weight of this thought experiment. In Beyond Good and Evil, affiliate link underneath, Nietzsche uses the metaphor of the gardener. A gardener sees a rugged plot of land with a crooked creek running through it. At first, it seems unremarkable, even unpleasant. An awful gardener would judge this piece of land useless and move on. Yet a great gardener would see opportunity. With care, they would shape the creek's edges, turning its bends into gentle arcs. They plant flowers and trees along its bank, making it a home for beauty and growth. The creek remains. It is not erased, but embraced, becoming a feature of the garden's charm. In life too, we must work with what we are given, transforming the rough into something remarkable. We all have traumas in our past or certain character flaws that aren't transformable. Yet, like the gardener, we should accept the necessary and see it as beauty. Imagine shaping your own life like a gardener does to accept and beautify the ugliness that lies in our own lives. This is Nietzsche's great resolution for the end of the year. To fully embrace suffering, we should consider Nietzsche's two metaphors, the climber and the gardener. The climber is the individual who channels their suffering into growth, striving for transformation and the attainment of greatness. This metaphor captures the spirit of overcoming adversity, of striving higher and turning pain into achievement. Yet the image of the climber falters when confronted with suffering that is too immense, too insurmountable to be overcome through sheer effort. It is in these moments that the gardener steps forward, offering a different response to suffering. The gardener embodies acceptance. Rather than seeking to transcend suffering, the gardener embraces it as an inner part of life. This archetype invites us to accept the necessary hardship of existence, to nurture them and to beautify life in their presence. This is the essence of Amor Fati, the love of fate. To live as a gardener is to reshape one's perspective, incorporating suffering not by transforming it into greatness, but by affirming it and finding meaning within its unchangeable reality. The climber transforms but struggles to accept. The gardener accepts and in doing so cultivates beauty. Together, these two perspectives offer a more complete understanding of how to engage with suffering. The climber teaches us resilience and the pursuit of greatness, while the gardener shows us grace and the ability to flourish amidst life's inevitabilities. In this interplay between the climber's striving and the gardener's acceptance, we uncover the profound wisdom of Nietzsche's New Year's resolution, a call to embrace life in its totality, with all its trials, and to craft meaning from every experience. A radical stance that hopes to eviscerate views on suffering found in prior religions and philosophy. How can Nietzsche's New Year's resolutions inspire us? Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to rethink the very nature of New Year's resolutions. Instead of setting superficial goals like exercising more, picking up a hobby, or dieting, Nietzsche would encourage us to aim for something far deeper, a complete reorientation of how we live and how we face life's difficulties. A list of resolutions focused on external accomplishments, he might argue, fails to address the core of our existence. How we confront suffering, hardship, and the pursuit of meaning, that is what lies at the core of life. For Nietzsche, the most transformative resolution would be to cultivate a radical acceptance of life as it is, including desire and its suffering. This could mean resolving not to shy away from pain, but to embrace it as a source of growth and self-discovery. It's not about improving in a single aspect of your life, but developing the strength and courage to face the entirety of existence with an affirmative stance, a willingness to say yes to every experience, good or bad. Imagine writing resolutions like, I will face challenge without resent, I will seek meaning in adversity, I will learn to love life and love fate, no matter where it leads me. These commitments go beyond surface level goals. They aim to transform the way we engage with life itself. This shift from avoiding discomfort to embracing it is what Nietzsche would see as a true renewal, a rebirth of the self. In these resolutions, greatness for your year awaits. By focusing our resolutions on changing how we live rather than what we do, we move closer to Nietzsche's vision of human flourishing, to become stronger, more resilient, and more authentic through the trials of existence. In this sense, New Year's becomes not just a time for planning improvements, but for affirming life in its totality and resolving to meet it with the courage it demands. So, let me share some last words of wisdom from Nietzsche with you, my friends. To all our viewers and subscribers, I wish suffering, desolation, sickness, ill-treatments, indignities, I wish that they should not remain unfamiliar with profound self-contempt, the torture of self-mistrust, the wretchedness of the vanquished. I have no pity for you, because I wish you the only thing that can prove today whether one is worth anything or not. That one endures.
The image of Nietzsche collapsing beside a horse in Turin remains etched in the minds of many philosophy students. It is often depicted as a defining moment in his life, marking an episode of intense mania. Nietzsche famously lost his mind in the last years of his life. While some attribute it to an illness, others point out the mental anguish Nietzsche endured through multiple years of his life. Famously falling out with many of his good friends, Nietzsche endured heartbreak multiple times. Only 44 years old, Nietzsche never recovers from his famous breakdown in Turin. The revolutionary thinker Nietzsche had much more to offer, yet what words and books he could have written are unknown. A huge loss which leads many scholars to wonder what he would have thought of his fame, the ensuing First World War, and so much more. This leads us to the inevitable question: what if Nietzsche went through therapy? And not just everyday mundane therapy, but what if Nietzsche visited one of the most renowned therapists of his time, Joseph Breuer? This is the plot of the book Nietzsche's Tears by famous psychiatrist Irving Yalom. Yalom imagines a meeting in 1882, a period in which both Nietzsche and Breuer were in Vienna. A visit, a meeting between doctor and patient would not have been out of the ordinary. Nietzsche often visited doctors for his ongoing migraines and visual problems, and Breuer was an outstanding doctor and psychiatrist in 19th century Vienna. Nietzsche would not have been a regular patient. At his core, Nietzsche believes in the ideal of the free spirit, someone who has fought himself free of the restraints of culture and morality. Nietzsche writes, "He is called a free spirit who thinks differently from what, on the basis of his origin, environment, his class and profession, or on the basis of the dominant views of his age, would have been expected of him." A visit to a therapist, by his standards, would translate to a form of brainwashing in which he sacrifices his freedom of thought and spirit. Breuer believes that deceiving Nietzsche is necessary for him to come to accept a therapy. His only option is to initially treat Nietzsche for his physical ailments, creating an opportunity to shift their dynamic into a therapeutic relationship. Many conversations ensue, and during these conversations, the relationship between Nietzsche and Breuer does indeed change to a therapeutic one, albeit that Nietzsche becomes a therapist to Breuer. Breuer believes that if he can demonstrate the power of therapy, Nietzsche will ultimately benefit from it as well. Acknowledging the therapeutic value within his own philosophical ideas, Nietzsche agrees to this challenge. What follows is a profound reversal of roles, with the renowned therapist Breuer immersing himself in Nietzsche's philosophical experiments, confronting aversion in the spirit of the Übermensch, staring into the abyss while wrestling with the idea of the eternal return, and ultimately embracing his fate as he envisions leaving his own wife in a subconscious dream. Through this approach, Breuer hopes to bypass Nietzsche's resistance to submitting himself to another's guidance by positioning himself as a fellow sufferer rather than an authority. But what exactly are Nietzsche's struggles? At the core of his torment lies an overwhelming sense of loneliness and isolation. In some sense, we see some of the writer Yalom's ideas on existential therapy poured through in his book. Irving Yalom, in his existential therapy framework, identifies four ultimate concerns that shape human existence and underlie psychological distress. These are death, the awareness of our own mortality and the struggle to find meaning despite life's impermanence. Freedom, the responsibility that comes with personal freedom, leading to anxiety about our choices and their consequences. Isolation, the fundamental separatedness of individuals, even in close relationships, and the challenge of overcoming existential loneliness. Meaninglessness, the need to create purpose in a world that does not inherently provide it. These concerns are central to Yalom's approach to existential psychotherapy, guiding individuals to confront and navigate them in a meaningful way. Freedom and isolation are particularly prominent in Nietzsche's struggle. Nietzsche's radical belief in self-overcoming and the will to power highlights the anxiety that comes with absolute freedom. He resists external influence and insists on forging his own path, embodying existential responsibility. Yet this has consequences. He experiences stress, loneliness, and is unable to connect with anyone for long periods of time. Breuer identifies this as one of the reasons for his physical ailments. The book ends with Nietzsche bursting out in tears, hence the title, as he admits to these feelings of loneliness and isolation. Yet his therapy does not imply a fictitious change in Nietzsche's life. The encounter with Breuer seems to signify Nietzsche's coming of age and readiness to write one of the greatest books in the history of philosophy, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Yalom seems to argue that Nietzsche needed this form of therapy to ready himself to write this absolute dynamite of a book. Existential psychotherapy is quite the interesting branch of therapy, as it focuses on the existential concerns underlying many of our psychological problems. The book, Nietzsche's Tears, is an interesting showcase of the therapeutic value of existential ideas. I would advise you all to go ahead and read the book, associate link in the description. Nietzsche is the philosopher with the hammer. He likens himself to dynamite, the Antichrist, the crucified, and so much more. The death of God, the will to power, and nihilism all echo a destructiveness to his philosophy. Yet Nietzsche is more than destruction alone. After all, destruction leaves nothing behind, and thus nihilism. Nietzsche formulates a life-affirming philosophy with his core concepts of the Übermensch and his mirror image, the last man, Amor Fati, and the Three Metamorphoses. In this video, we will develop these 4 concepts in dialogue, each video in a similar sense to one another. Of course, these concepts are not standalones. They are connected, so stick around to the end of the video to find out how these concepts correlate. We hope you enjoy the core concepts of Nietzsche. Man is a rope stretched between animal and Übermensch, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing.
Man is a rope? Was this man on drugs?
Hold your horses. Nietzsche often uses metaphors in his language to make his readers think and develop their reasoning. He holds that facing difficulties and resistance strengthens a person. In its core, Nietzsche's philosophy is one man's relationship towards the difficulties and suffering he faces. The Übermensch in that sense is at the core of his philosophy. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch is one of the most discussed subjects in history.
So, were Nietzsche's ideas revolutionary for his time?
The short answer would be yes, but at the same time, as is the case with all ideas, there were other authors who had similar ideas that flowed from the spirit of the times. The right circumstances had to be present. Or as Nietzsche would have it, I love all those who are like heavy raindrops falling individually from the dark cloud that hang over men. They herald the coming of the lightning and perish as heralds. In 19th century Romanticism, there was a great focus on the wild spirit, the person who defied societal norms to follow their own individualized path and nature. One example of that is the Byronic hero of the author Lord Byron. Manfred, Lord Byron's most popular poem, summarizes this Byronic hero perfectly. Manfred is a figure with the traits of defiance, introspection, and tragic grandeur. As is described in the poem, sorrow is knowledge. They who know the most must mourn the deepest over the fatal truth, the tree of knowledge is not that of life. From my youth upward, my spirit walked not with the souls of men, nor looked upon the earth with human eyes. The thirst of their ambition was not mine, the aim of their existence was not mine. My joy was in the wilderness, to breathe the difficult air of the iced mountain's top, where the birds dare not build, nor insects wing. These were my pastimes, and to be alone, for if the beings of whom I was one, hating to be so, crossed me in my path, I felt myself degraded back to them, and was all clay again. And then I dived in my lone wanderings to the case of death, searching its cause and its effect, and drew from withered bones and skulls, and heaped up dust conclusions, most forbidden. In his early works, Nietzsche himself spoke of the free spirit as an ideal, someone who has fought to free himself of the constraints of tradition to shape values himself. As modern thought evolved, the focus on the human expression of one's own nature became more central. Humanism, enlightenment and its idea of sapere aude, romanticism and the inner nature of man, expressionism and the focus on the inner emotional processes, until finally we arrive at the psychoanalysis of Freud and the unconscious. All of these schools of thought show a focus on the human development and thus hold the roots of the idea of the Übermensch within them. In loads of literature of these times, the genius starts to play a central role.
But then what did Nietzsche mean by his Übermensch exactly?
Nietzsche introduces his idea of the Übermensch in his work Thus Spoke Zarathustra. If you are interested in a full in-depth video on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, check out our video we made a few months ago. The first mention of the idea of the Übermensch goes as follows. I teach you the Übermensch. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beasts rather than overcome man? What is ape to man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment? and man shall be just that for the Übermensch, a laughingstock or a painful embarrassment. Behold, I teach you the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes.
What did Nietzsche mean by remaining faithful to the earth?
Nietzsche interprets nature in a unique way. Nature is chaos and conflict, indifferent to our suffering, or to use his term, nature is will to power. Man should remain faithful to the idea that nature is chaos and conflict. Man should overcome himself to find meaning in this indifferent reality. As we mentioned before, Nietzsche's core philosophy is that we should face difficulties and resistance head on to strengthen ourselves. Think to yourselves if you have ever had a moment of hardship that you have overcome, how it sheds a new light on life, but also how it helps you forward in life. In this idea lies a sharp critique of Christianity. Christianity, to Nietzsche, offers people suffering, hardship, a way out, a salvation in heaven. To Nietzsche, that is the denial of what life is, the will to power. The will to stand up to confront one's hardship and strengthen himself. Yet the Übermensch is not a fixed person that confronts his suffering and hardship. The Übermensch is a horizon to humans.
Man is a rope, the Übermensch is a horizon. What are you yapping about?
The Übermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. I entreat you, my brethren, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of supraterrestrial hopes. Behold, I teach you the Übermensch. He is this lightning. He is this madness. Behold, I am the prophet of the lightning, and a heavy drop from the cloud, but this lightning is called the Übermensch. The Übermensch is an ideal and thus a horizon, an ideal form of life, yet never achievable, because the ideal itself is for people to strive, to overcome and to strengthen themselves. We arrive at what the core of an ideal is. An ideal is something people are willing to put themselves at stake for. Nietzsche fears that this striving towards is leaving the minds of people. Thus he formulates a sort of meta-ideal that speaks of a striving person that creates values anew. Zarathustra is the prophet that has come to teach people about this meta-ideal, for people to strive toward greatness and overcome themselves. In some sense, Nietzsche can be seen as a social Darwinist, although a very important distinction should be made. While Darwin focuses on the will to life, Nietzsche focuses on the will to power. As Nietzsche views it, people would rather die than see their power seized from their hands.
That makes sense. Can you say something more about the relationship between the Übermensch and Nazism?
Nazi doctrine was convinced that the Aryan race, people with blue eyes and blonde hair, were superior to others. They appropriated specific texts of Nietzsche to justify their ideas on race superiority. The ideal of the Übermensch got translated into the ideal of the Aryan race. They used this term to mirror the lowly way they thought of Jews and Roma people. Nietzsche's sister, Elisabeth, was well known for her anti-Semitic ideas, and when her brother lost sanity in 1889, she saw an opportunity to rewrite his work into an anti-Semitic manifesto. There is thus a great difference between the Übermensch of the Nazis and the Übermensch of Nietzsche.
I think I understand now. Could you summarize what you have said?
The idea of individual expression is at the core of 19th century thought. We gave the example of Byron's Manfred, but the same could be said of a figure like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment or Goethe's Faust. Nietzsche's Übermensch, in my interpretation, goes one step beyond these by formulating a goal or horizon, rather than describing a person with certain traits. One can only understand this by taking Nietzsche's view of the world as will to power. The will to power postulates that life is suffering, chaos and conflict. Through this conflict, change and strengthening occurs. The Übermensch is a horizon where people internalize this conflict and try to overcome themselves. Nietzsche postulates a similar kind of critique on society, and in particular Christianity, as is heard by other Romantic authors. Nietzsche's ideas were misused and misinterpreted during the Second World War in Nazi Germany. Well, hello there. Want to support us? Just buy us a coffee. That's all we need to make the next video. Thanks. There they stand, he said to his heart. There they laugh. They don't understand me. I'm not the lips for these ears. Must they first have their ears smashed, so they learn to hear with their eyes? Must one rumble like drums and preachers of penitence, or do they believe only one who stammers? They have something they're proud of. But what do they call the thing that makes them proud? They call it culture. It distinguishes them from the goatherds.
Therefore, they don't like to hear the word contempt applied to themselves, and so I shall address their pride. The last man is Nietzsche's analysis of men if we continue down the road we have started. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche uses the image of a detestable figure such as the last man to push us towards the striving for the Übermensch.
What is this Übermensch?
In short, the Übermensch is a person that creates his own values, lives by his own rules, who affirms to conflict and resistance to strengthen himself. Striving and going forward is at the very core of this person's core. For a full explanation on the Übermensch, watch our video on the Übermensch or the video on the core concepts of Nietzsche.
Okay, cool. So the last man is a detestable person.
And so I shall speak to them of that which is most contemptible, and that is the last man. And Zarathustra addressed the populace thus: It's high time for man to set a goal for himself. It's high time for man to plant the seed of his loftiest hope. His soul is still rich enough for it, but someday this soul will become poor and tame, and no tall tree will be able to grow from it anymore. Ooh, the time is coming when the man will no longer shoot the arrow of his longing out over men, and the string of his bow has forgotten how to whir. I say to you, one must still have chaos within oneself if one is to be able to give birth to a dancing star. I say to you, you still have chaos within yourself. Ooh, the time is coming when man will no longer be able to give birth to a star. Ooh, the time of the most contemptible man is coming, one who can no longer despise himself. See, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is star? The last man asks and blinks. The earth has become small then, and on it hops the last man, who makes everything small. His race is as hard to exterminate as the flea beetle. The last man has the greatest longevity. We have invented happiness, the last man says, and he blinks. Nietzsche's last man is the exact opposite of the Übermensch, someone who makes everything small, who is content with whatever and doesn't strive for anything. As is noted with We have invented happiness, the feeling of contentment with the status quo is raised to an ideal. No longer being capable of despising things within oneself, to better oneself and to strengthen oneself. The last man is the man of content, a finished product that doesn't have the new horizon to strive towards. The last man isn't curious for anything. It is someone who enjoys the everyday mundane without ever striving for anything.
So how did people react to Zarathustra's last man?
Give us this last man, O Zarathustra, they called. Make us this last man, and you can keep your Übermensch. And all the townspeople hallowed and clicked their tongues. But Zarathustra became sad and said to his heart, They don't understand me. I am not the lips for these ears. I have probably lived in the mountains too long. I have listened too much to brooks and trees. Now I speak to them as to goatherds. My soul is as steadfast and bright as the mountain in the morning. They think I'm cold, a mocker with frightening jokes, and now they look at me and laugh, and while they laugh they still hate me. There is ice in their laughter. In this last part, Nietzsche shows that people are happy to hear of his last man who is living in content. The big danger he speaks of, the most despisable man, is being applauded. The sentiment is reminiscent of the parable of the madman, where Nietzsche warns humanity for the death of God, and none have ears for this. While the last man is only mentioned in this one parable, the weight it holds is heavy. It is another warning for humanity to not choose for contentment over striving. Greatness lies at the top of the mountain, but we seem content to stay at the foot of the mountain in order not to see our feet hurt. To fully grasp the last man, it is important to consider the context in which it is presented.
What is this context exactly?
Well, if you want a full explanation of the book, check out the video we did on it. But in short, Thus Spoke Zarathustra is Nietzsche's ideal-shaping book. He presents his idea of philosophy after the death of God in the Übermensch. However, the book is a lot more complicated, so be sure to check out our full explanation on this most intriguing book. Of the three metamorphoses of the spirit, I tell you, how the spirit becomes a camel, and the camel a lion, and the lion, finally, a child. If there was ever a philosopher in history to be given a prize for his use of metaphors, it would be none other than Friedrich Nietzsche to take it home. Nietzsche's Three Metamorphoses is one of the most read texts in history. Because of its metaphorical nature, often people misread or misinterpret the meaning behind these metaphors. We will follow the structure of the text to fully explain the meaning behind one of philosophy's most interesting parables.
So what did Nietzsche mean by spirit becoming a camel?
Before we dive into the text, it is important to understand the reference of the spirit. It was Hegel who wrote on the spirit as a historical development in the history of philosophy. He argued that one can see progress with a specific goal within philosophy. In this text, Nietzsche thus analyzes the history of philosophy from his own viewpoint. The camel is a carrier animal. It can take upon itself loads of weight. In this sense, the weight of tradition, Christianity, it takes upon oneself. The values of our tradition is a heavy weight the camel must carry. These are the values of Christianity that, according to Nietzsche, oppose life. This is how Nietzsche formulated it. There is much that is difficult for the spirit, the strong, reverent spirit that would bear much, but the difficult and the most difficult are what its strengths demand. What is difficult? Asks the spirit that would bear much and kneels down like a camel, wanting to be well loaded. What is most difficult, O heroes? Asks the spirit that would bear much, that I may take it upon myself and exult in my strength. Is it not humbling oneself to wound one's hauntingness, letting one's folly shine to mock one's wisdom? Or is it this, stepping into filthy waters when they are the waters of truth and not repulsing cold frogs and hot toads? Or is it this, loving those that despise us and offering a hand to the ghosts that would frighten us? All these most difficult things the spirit that would bear much takes upon itself, like the camel that, burdened, speeds into the desert. Thus the spirit speeds into its desert. The speeding into the desert is a double entendre on the camel being a desert animal and Jesus Christ spending time in the desert. The camel carries the values of tradition and Christianity as a heavy weight. The first steps into the history of philosophy with Platonism and Christianity are obvious here.
What did Nietzsche mean by the camel becoming a lion?
In the loneliest desert, however, the second metamorphosis occurs. Here, the spirit becomes a lion who would conquer his freedom and be master in his own desert. Here, he seeks out his last master. He wants to fight him and his last god for ultimate victory. He wants to fight with the greatest dragon. Yet Nietzsche goes one step beyond tradition. The lion is the king of the jungle, the one that dictates the game of life and death in this jungle. While tradition creates sheep that follow, Nietzsche now indicates a need for a breaking with tradition. And in history, just this happens, as philosophy broke with this tradition and chose to fight itself free. Freedom of the spirit. The human capacities of critical thinking grow as a more central pillar of philosophy. In humanism, enlightenment, and romanticism, we see this focus on fighting oneself free from tradition and religion. Nietzsche continues, "Who is the great dragon whom the spirit will no longer call Lord and God? Thou shalt is the name of the great dragon, but the spirit of the lion says, I will. Thou shalt lies in his way, sparkling like gold, an animal covered with scales, and on every scale shines a golden thou shalt. Values thousands of years old shine on these scales, and thus speaks the mightiest of all dragons. All value has long been created, and I am all created value. Verily, there shall be no more I will. Thus speaks the dragon. The camel was the carrier of the values of tradition with their thou shalt. Or to put it in another way, this is how you must live according to tradition. The great dragon with sparkling gold scales refers to the tradition and its shiny golden values. This tradition does not want to hear of any free will or I will. It is against this tradition that Nietzsche sees the lion as a fighting animal that wants to break free from this.
What did Nietzsche mean by the lion needing to become a child?
My brothers, why is there a need in spirit for the lion? Why is not the beast of burden, which renounces and is revenant, enough? To create new values, that even the lion cannot do, but the creation of freedom for oneself and a sacred no, even to duty, for that, my brothers, the lion is needed. To assume the right of new values, that is the most terrifying assumption for a reverent spirit that would bear much. Verily, to him is praying and a matter for a beast of prey. He once loved thou shalt as most sacred. Now he must find illusion and caprice even in the most sacred. That freedom from his love may become his prey. The lion is needed for such prey.
Okay, that is clear. The lion is needed to free himself from the thou shalt. But why is the child needed?
But say, my brothers, what can the child do that even the lion could not do? Why must the praying lion still become a child? The child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelled wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. For the game of creations, my brother, a sacred yes is needed. The spirit now wills his own will, and he who had been lost to the world now conquers the world. The child is the last step, the creating of one's own values. Children hold no grudge, no resent, but create games with new rules. If children are left to their own device, they start creating new games with new rules. This is Nietzsche's keen insight. The creation of values and rules, like in a game, is what is necessary. This creating of new values is what Nietzsche looks at as will to power. Nietzsche looks at the history of philosophy as a development of tradition towards creation of one's own values. Parallel to this analysis is that in these three metamorphoses one can see a guide for life as well. One should take traditions upon oneself, fight himself free from them at some point and create his own way in life. This movement is what we see in 19th century philosophy.
So these three metamorphoses are the three steps a human is supposed to take, but also an analysis of the history of philosophy?
Exactly. Nietzsche gives us three metamorphoses of life as a guide to life and analysis and criticism of the history of philosophy. You can easily connect these ideas to other concepts of Nietzsche such as the will to power or the Übermensch. The Übermensch is the child that creates one's own values according to the world as will to power. For the new year. I still live, I still think. I still have to live, for I still have to think. Sum ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum. Today, everybody permits himself the expression of his wish and dearest thought. Hence, I too shall say what it is that I wish for myself today, and what was the first thought to run across my heart this year. What thought shall be for me the reason, warranty, and sweetness of my life henceforth. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. Amor Fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation, and all in all and overall, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. Amor Fati is Nietzsche's credo for life, a way of approaching hardship and difficulty in life, a way to overcome resentment for people and unwilled events of one's past. It is a way for people to take out the poisonous thoughts that come from a crushing fate.
Where does this idea of Amor Fati stem from?
It is said that the idea originates from the ancient Stoics, although they did put a different emphasis on the meaning and never literally mention Amor Fati. In Stoicism, the deal is that you focus on what is in your control and accept with a sort of indifference what is not. As Seneca put it, winter brings the cold and we must shiver. Summer brings back the heat and we have to swelter. Bad weather tries to health and we have to be ill. Somewhere or other we are going to have encounters with wild beasts and with people too. More dangerous than all these beasts. Floods will rob us of one thing, fire of another. These are the conditions of our existence which we cannot change. What we can do is adopt a noble spirit, such a spirit as befits a good person, so that we may bear up bravely under all that fortune sends us and bring our wills into tune with nature's. Reversals, after all, are the means by which nature regulates this visible realm of hers. Clear skies follow cloudy. After the calm comes the storm. The winds take turns to blow. Day succeeds night. While part of the heavens is in ascendant, another is sinking. It is by means of opposites that eternity endures. For the Stoics, fate refers to the logos that governs life. While it is an interesting topic, I suggest for people to check out our videos on Stoicism for greater detail.
Then how did Nietzsche comprehend Amor Fati?
Well, firstly, Nietzsche refers to fate as something to be loved and embraced. As he put it in one of his last books, Ecce Homo, my formula for greatness in a human being is Amor Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it. All idealism is mendacity in the face of what is necessary, but love it. To on the one hand accept all pain and trauma in one's life, but not only accept it, but also love it.
And secondly, Amor Fati is only one side of the coin. You cannot comprehend Amor Fati fully without Nietzsche's thought experiment of the eternal return. Nietzsche poses us with the question of life identically returning into eternity in the gay science. What if, some day or night, a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, "This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything, another will be small or great in your life, will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence, even the spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate, eternal confirmation and seal? Is there trauma in our past that we cannot accept? Well, we will have to relive it into eternity, so one should learn to love it either way. Nietzsche thought of this thought experiment high in the mountains, near Lake Silvapana in Switzerland. He called this thought experiment the greatest weight, as it forces humanity to overcome its resentment towards past trauma and even life itself.
This remains a little vague. Could you give me a concrete example?
Concrete example? This is philosophy, for God's sake. I'll give you a metaphor to help your puddly brain. Imagine a piece of land. On this land there grew a few trees, some grass, flowers and bushes. Through all this lavish wilderness there flows a measly stream of water. It is barely visible through all the green. Then a gardener arrives and has two choices. Either he throws his hands in the air and yells, "What an ugly piece of land!" Or the gardener tries to reshape the wilderness in such a sense that the measly stream becomes an integral part of the beautiful wilderness. He accepts and learns to love the fact that in his garden there runs a measly stream of water and reshapes the garden in order to fit the measly stream. The gardener is a great metaphor to understand what we mean by Amor Fati. Do not experience resentment for unwilled things, yet despite has some very interesting etymological roots, yet despite this ugliness show power of will and find beauty in your measly stream, just as the gardener does in his.
What do you mean by the roots of the word despite?
Well, for the word despite, as well as the French word malgré, the German trotz or the Dutch ondanks, this word is connected in its etymological roots to the will. Wherever and whenever this word is used, it refers to having the willpower to overcome a certain situation. It refers to having the willpower to accept one's flaws and unwilled past. Nietzsche is the philosopher of willpower, and one should not underestimate the vigor with which he wrote about this. The Übermensch and the Last Man, Amor Fati and the Three Metamorphoses. All of these concepts are part of Nietzsche's life-affirming philosophy or yes-saying. How do these concepts relate to one another? Well, it's obvious that the Übermensch and the Last Man are mirror images. What the Übermensch is, the Last Man is not. The Übermensch strives for greatness, the Last Man is content with the status quo. The last step of the Three Metamorphoses is the child, who creates his own values, makes his own rules and plays his own game. The child is another way of approaching what the Übermensch is, a creating of one's own value, a creating of new values. And then there is Amor Fati, the odd one out. Accepting your own fate does not sound very Übermenschesque. The Übermensch fights his fate, overcomes resistance and suffering, and now we talk of acceptance. There is an undeniable tension between these two concepts. Most of these concepts find their related meaning in the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Are you looking for a full in-depth analysis of the book and the tension between the Übermensch and Amor Fati? Check out our full video on Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Most of the other books have a rather destructive nature in their critique of tradition and religion. In future videos, we will delve into books that highlight Nietzsche's critique. For now, thank you for listening, and we are happy to serve you with philosophy. Also, subscribe please. Bye.